Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this continuing series of CTO Tech Talks. Our tech talk this morning is on the dark web, something everybody knows all about, and yet not really. I think it's a human condition that we're ready to learn everything until we feel satisfied, and then we know what we need to know. But I think there's a lot to learn about this. I have with me this morning Brad Liggett. I hope I got that right. Brad is the manager for America's Intel Architects at Cybersixgill. Cybersixgill is a good partner of Gotham who does a lot of work on the dark web. So we thought we'd reach out to this. And in my ongoing theory for how to do these, I just do the things that people are asking me about. And I'm getting a lot of questions about this. And so maybe Brad, just do a quick intro. Tell us how you got into this whole, being a dark web buster thing or being a cyber person.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it all really kind of dates back to 1998 when I got started in tech, and I've taken a lot of meandering turns around over the years, but I've been with Cybersixgill now for a year this week, actually. The last 5 years prior, I was with Risk IQ prior to the Microsoft acquisition. And what I love about being over here is while Risk IQ was everything surface web, Cybersixgill is kind of the inverse and everything deep and dark web. So that's a little bit about me. I'm based in Kansas City, Missouri, born and raised, but I'm on planes nearly every week and have kind of been traveling globally for a long time. Kansas City is just a good place to call home at the end of the day.
Nice. Well, luckily for you, not in Florida right now, so I don't have to worry about that.
One of my teammates is, and he had to weather the storm. Yeah,
something there. Ali, if you get a chance, can you just highlight the two speakers? That'd be great. So I think let's just kind of get into it, Brad. I mean, so why don't you just cover some basics, which is, what is the dark web? Another phrase we hear is deep web. Like, maybe give us an idea to people who are on this, who are obviously in the field, but maybe more less technical than you. What are we talking about when we talk about dark web, and how does it differ from the deep web?
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's something, a lot of people use them interchangeably, and that's not a bad thing. But generally, we kind of define the deep web as things that are unindexed, something you can't just go and search Google and find. And there's barriers of entry. You have to have exact addresses, but deep web generally, you don't need some type of routing protocol to get you there. Whereas the dark web, that's when you need access to Tor or some kind of other protocol like I2P or ZeroNet that will then route you to these specific addresses. So people hear a lot about onion sites, right? These are very long kind of encrypted looking addresses that end in .onion. And you're not going to get there just by opening Chrome and browsing to it. Even if you have the specific address, you're going to need one of those protocols like Tor, I2P, et cetera.
Right. So you're basically traveling the same infrastructure, but you need a different browser, and you need to know exactly where you're going. Is that a good summary to understand it? Or
yeah, there really is no Google of the underground, so to speak, right? Or some kind of search engine. You have to know the exact address, have to have it bookmarked to get there in order to find them.
And then, so I mean, are there? I guess there's a reason why people are doing this. But I mean, what is? Just sum up, why would somebody want to be dark web versus? I mean, there's some obvious thoughts, but I mean, why are people doing this? They just don't want to be seen, or what's the concept here?
Sure, the whole concept really is privacy. And so while obviously there's nefarious and malicious reasons for getting into these areas, whether it's marketplaces and selling things that you probably don't want to sell on an open market anywhere. We also see people they want to hide their identities. And so there are legitimate reasons that people would want to use these types of protocols, whether it's I2P or ZeroNet or et cetera. Think of dissidents in countries that are, perhaps trying to fight dictatorship and things of that nature. You see, obviously, the press and journalists as well. If they're working with sensitive information, that they will want that level of privacy. So sure, legitimate reasons, and really just if it's you and me, being able to just hide our history better, if that's what you choose. You know, we have the concept even in Chrome of the private browsing, right? And people will use that quite a bit. You have newer browsers, whether it's DuckDuckGo or some of the others that are gaining in popularity just from people who just don't want, you know, the cookies and the trackers and the various things that are loaded onto machines when they do this.
Yeah, I know it's crazy talk, but some people actually don't trust Google. I don't know. I mean,
Well, I mean, you know, they do have the motto, do no harm, right?
yes, there you go. As long as a stone out front, it's probably good. Excellent. So, I mean, so what you're saying is like, because again, I have this perspective, and I've talked to people, and they're like, "Well, I don't want to go. Like, it's like the cyber nocturne alley, right? Like, if I go there, it must be bad. If you know, if I even download tours, the government can track me. I mean, you know, I mean, I don't know what percentage that varies, but from your perspective, it's not like that. It's not, you know, the immediate. If you're on the dark web, it doesn't necessarily mean it's immediately nefarious, is what you're saying.
Pretty much, right?
It probably is mostly nefarious, but it's not
Mostly, but yeah.
So for people who are interested, and I know I've talked to people, and they were like, "Well, you know, I'm nervous." And would you say, like, if you're interested, download Tor, go to some insights? I mean, how would you satisfy that curiosity as somebody like just interested in seeing what's on the dark web, or would your advice be just don't? Like, there's really nothing there that you want to look at.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Is everyone's got that level of curiosity and wanting to do, you know, just keep up on technologies, for example, maybe. You know, starting out, yeah, go and, you know, do your research, right? It's one thing to go get a Tor browser and on, you know, your work laptop or your personal computer and connect and start getting out there. But there's a level of caution that I would put out there as well. You know, when we access a lot of these places, we'll do it on what we call dirty machines, or for example, there is, you know, the Tails operating system that essentially just sits on a thumb drive, and every time you shut down, it wipes. So every time you boot into Tails, it's a fresh instance. So if for whatever reason you were to pick up some malware along the way because you clicked a link that you thought was safe, but then it wasn't, you're not actually then, you know, leaving a trail on your machine. So always be in something that's going to wipe itself afterwards. You know, some people will use a Kali instance because it's virtual or can be virtual, or some other type of maybe getting into a virtual machine. Again, we like Tails because Tails essentially just wipes. You have a fresh instance every time you boot off of that thumb drive.
So just for the Gotham place listening, what Brad's saying is you're not going to download Tor and surf from Gotham assets. Just so we're clear here, you're going to find some other kind of machine to do that from. Yeah, and I think, but this process of like knowing, because you have to know where to go. I mean, on the regular web, you can search for onion sites and stuff like that. I mean, you can find starting points of certain types of things, right? That's not impossible. Is that true? Or
yeah, that's not impossible. One of the really popular ones that was surface web was raid forums, and raid forums is a place where you could start and get into those various forums, start to kind of poke around. That's where you could find particular onion addresses as well. Raid forums was recently seized though and taken down. So there would need to be some other ones, but again, forums, marketplaces, they go up and down all the time. Obviously something has probably popped up. I'm sure, you know, just doing some cursory Google searching could help at least get you started into finding where to go.
All right, so focusing on probably what we think about, which is the criminal stuff. I mean, you know, people are there and they're looking for, you know, or, you know, whatever, they're buying drugs, they're buying credit cards, you know, they're looking for hacker toolkits, those kinds of things. I mean, are those things you can search for and find, or is that stuff, you know, what, like that type of stuff? I mean, you have to know somebody. Is that how it works? I mean, how do people get those contacts?
Yeah, so it's a good question, right? You can find just about anything for sale, and tools, credit cards, usernames and passwords. I mean, it's kind of endless, right? And getting into, especially a particular marketplace, they've got sections for just about anything, arms, fake pharmaceuticals, illicit drugs, even the wares, so to speak, and the various tools that can help with malware type infection and data stealers from those. You know, we've got this whole concept out there that we see these people that are writing tools to help lower the barrier of entry for other criminals that are wanting to get started, right? You think of an example of Redline Stealer. We see Redline Stealer, and there's some other various copycats like Vidar, Raccoon, Stealer. These are essentially ways that people can come in, buy them, start to do, you know, pray and sprays and phishing attempts. Once these apps, this malware gets loaded onto machines, it steals the browser password file, for example, and then uploads it to a C2. And then somebody's got full access to potentially usernames, passwords, and even cookie sessions and cookie IDs for these particular sites, right? So it's not uncommon then that we see in these marketplaces, as an example, somebody selling access to this entire password file that's got maybe Netflix, Facebook, a few others, but then maybe it's got the Okta instance to whatever company they work for, or some type of SAP program and log in to what they're working for. These get sold for as little as $10 on these marketplaces, and then criminals can come in and buy them really cheap and then potentially launch into campaigns, whether it's ransomware or data exfiltration. You know, if they get the right credentials to these particular organizations, that's the big first step right there.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure my kids have my Netflix password for sale on the dark web, because there's no way that many people could use Netflix. But jokes aside, like but to me, like, it's weird. I guess there's this weird conflict in my head between like the sort of capitalism of this, which is you need customers, and the secrecy of it, which is nobody can find them. Like so how do, like, to me, it's like how, and not like nobody's, even if assuming that obviously you find them, some people must be able to find them. I assume authorities can find them. So that, why can't they shut them down? Like, they're on the same IP, you know. So I'm having trouble conceptualizing how they can be so open on some level and still operate.
Right.
How does that work?
Yeah, well, the privacy aspect of the routing protocols is a big part of it. And then, of course, just like in you know, the open web, you have bulletproof hosters that are out there that just ignore repeated attempts for things like takedown, right? So thinking back to my past life and where we were dealing with brand protection and digital risk protection, right? A criminal can set up a typo squat domain, something that looks similar to Gotham.com as an example, but it's G0THAM. If it's set up on a bulletproof hoster and it's starting to serve up perhaps a phishing page, for example, I mean, you can do takedown requests till you're blue in the face. That bulletproof hoster really doesn't care. And then you have to take additional steps, maybe to try to take over the domain or other things like that. And so, you know, you've got bulletproof hosters, you've got the anonymity. It's a long, deep trail that authorities have to traverse to try to uncover these. Now, like I've mentioned before, right? Things have gotten seized. We've heard of, you know, obviously raid forums, I don't know how familiar people are with the Silk Road from several years ago. Speaking of the Silk Road, I mean, that was one of the pioneering ones back in the, I believe, early 2000s. If you haven't read American Kingpin, the book about the Silk Road, I definitely would recommend it. I couldn't put it down. I had it done in about 4 days. Very, very good book.
Put that on the list. But again, like my research, the concept comment was, as fast as we can take them down, they can put them up 10 times faster. So
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the thing too, is this is typically where when you're in them, people will even advertise that there's new sites or new marketplaces, new forums. And so that's where we find a lot of the new ones as well in our collection, that then we'll then take those addresses, add them into our collection, and go from there, because you never know when one is going to get seized. Or, I mean, not just seizure alone, there's the whole concept of exit scams, which is a whole other topic that we could get into with some of these sites.
Again, given the anonymity, and without you, obviously can't, like, you're not gonna give us the secret sauce of Cybersixgill, but like, how does you, or how would anybody have an awareness of all the things available in the dark web? Like, because I think that's one of the challenges for us as a provider, is that many of our vendors, with good intentions, will talk about that they provide dark web awareness, right? And which is great, but at the same time, like, what, you know, given the anonymity, all the, like, I'm sure there's a shades of gray in that. Like, what does that mean, and how do people do it? So, I mean, how can anyone claim to have a full awareness with all that anonymity, and what does it look like to be better at it rather than worse? I mean, maybe you can talk about that.
That's a great question. Nobody has it all. We don't even claim to have it all, right? I mean, if somebody says that they scan the entire internet every day, you know, that's probably not entirely accurate. And the same goes with, you know, looking at the underground. Nobody really knows exactly how many sites are up there. The concept is for us is being as many as we can get into that we're aware of, right? Today, we're in over 700 of them. Now, 700 likely could be a drop in the bucket, but it is a pretty high number to be able to collect from day in and day out, which is one of the things that we kind of pride ourselves on, right? And the value of it is that, you know, if you have a team that's of threat hunters and CTI analysts, and they're doing their own program, and they have their own personas, and they're kind of lurking to make sure that nobody's talking about their particular organization, they're not going to be able to log in and read through 700 in one day, or even a week for that matter, right? And so again, we're always looking for new ones that are popping up, and we find them in our collection, which is very helpful. And then from there, we have our team of we have a small team of analysts that's all they do all day is you know, curating these personas and getting invites. That's another, you know, there's all these barriers of entry. So it's one thing to know about new ones that pop up, but there's all these barriers of entry, whether it's language barriers, right? You know, do you have people on staff that can read Russian or Arabic or Chinese or Farsi and get into all of these forums? Some of them require invite codes. A lot of marketplaces, you don't get in until you fill a crypto wallet with at least $5,000,
Right.
because then that means you're serious about transacting inside of that marketplace.
Is that part of what, I mean, you guys build crypto wallets? You have to occasionally make a purchase or something to stay. To me, it's part of this community. I mean, and again, you guys are pretty specific. I'm going to guess you have a focus, right? Mostly what you're interested in is the thing customers are interested in, right? Which is
right.
You're right. You're not out looking for some of the. There's lots of bad things, but like perhaps you're not worried about people selling drugs as much as you are people selling data. Is that fair? I mean, you have to be in the community, right? I mean, that's really what this boils down to. Is like you guys like it's espionage, right?
Yep.
Human espionage.
You have to be in, you have to start collecting. And And to be fair, right, we work with companies that actually are interested in whether it's fake pharma,
Yeah,
or potentially legit pharma that's been skimmed in the supply chain, in the distribution chain. And you have actual legitimate, not counterfeit, but legitimate product of theirs that's potentially being sold in these underground marketplaces.
interesting. So that kind of opens a conversation, like what is interesting? Like you're trying to find what's interesting to customers, and I talk to a lot of customers who are like, well, there's this whole dark web, but I'm not sure, what's actionable, what's interesting, what does a customer need to know about from the dark web? Why would they care? I guess as part of this is the conversation.
Yeah, that's a good question, because sometimes it's just part of awareness, which, one could argue is not always a CTI related type thing. But what is the chatter about that? And then also too, whether, the company is releasing maybe some of their, quarterly announcements. Maybe they're going IPO. Maybe their executives have been mentioned in the news for whatever reason. That's when things start to become interesting, because, obviously then they start to get on the radar of the criminal underground. And what are the different things that these gangs can do to exploit, them being in the news or them being talked about. So, day in and day out, there may not be a lot of actionable things. But then when they get on the radar, then something's actionable. There's also, the inverse too of, think of all these credentials that are being sold in the initial access broker market. What if all of a sudden their domain pops up as somebody's email credentials have been stolen? Then that's when, okay, let's find out, well, who got compromised. Let's work on password resets. Let's work on shutting off access, limiting access to that particular user, and then getting a hold of their machine and getting it wiped. Where they did they infect a corporate laptop? We're still kind of in these days of COVID where even though it's past, people are still working from home. They're filling their day and maybe doing some other things on the side. And then that's when, they might get infected with Redline, for example. And now the keys to the kingdom are available for sale for $10.
Yeah, part of it's, I'll go back to the passwords. That's more interesting. But like on the news front, I think there's like a signal to noise ratio issue, because if you just search for your company name on the dark web, you're going to get a lot of stuff. Because it's weird when I've done these searches is how many times just like plain press releases on the dark web, like just
Right.
like people are mirroring. It's like you're going to see a lot of public data that's already out there for some bizarre reason just mirrored onto the dark web. So when you do these searches, it is kind of hard to come up with. Do you have some guidance for that? Like how do you kind of find, improve that signal to noise ratio when you're just looking for your stuff? I think passwords are a good one, because you can just, if you're looking for your domain, your exact domain name, at gothamtg.com, when we've done those kinds of searches, we're going to see exposed passwords, or some of our banks use your product for like looking for credit cards, like looking for their prefixes. Like again, so if there's a good string search, that helps a lot.
Right.
But I guess, do you have any like suggestions or secret sauce for like fixing that signal to noise ratio? Is it just out of the work or?
Yeah, in our collection specifically, and again, I'll agree, this is something that can be very difficult. The signal to noise, right? What's data versus intelligence, and
right.
we have this conversation all the time, and it's a hard one to really nail down, because obviously every organization is going to be a little bit different. And so, yeah, having the ability to then tighten that net a little bit, right? Because when I talk to clients for the very first time, I'll cast a very wide net. I'll do something very generic. We're going to get a ton of results, and a lot of them are just going to be like, yeah, so what? That's when, we can start to then maybe do a more custom string search, and start to put in maybe subsidiary names or information that is more relevant to them. Tighten that query up a little bit. You got to kind of research and know. And it also helps too, right? Especially if a company has a CTI program already in place. What are the ways that they're searching and bringing in data to bring down the noise? Let's mimic what they're doing. If they're, Google dorking and as part of their program and things like that. Put in those other keywords that might then tighten things up to things they really care about more.
Right.
And then put that in ours and create custom alerts around it. Because again, there's not a great value when we have a client that just comes in every day and starts searching, and that's, they spend, a whole FTE just operating our platform. We want to make things very specific and tie custom alerts around that so that they can kind of sit back and know, okay, things are probably fine. They're doing the searches, and then when they get the alarms and the alerts, they can go in and then find the additional context, right? Like a post may have started with, with this particular search string, but then also what are the replies? What are other people saying then that provides more context around it?
Right, going down that sort of rabbit hole. I think it's interesting with because I'm speaking for myself as a person who, obviously I'm one of the partners at Gotham. So I use my corporate email as my email for like all the time. Like I have a personal email. So that ends up like that. I use my corporate email for tie-ins to all kinds of third-party passwords. And of course, sites get turned over. So when I search the dark web for places where my email, where my passwords have been turned over, what I see is passwords that I used 5 years ago, 6 years, like 10 years ago, whatever. I mean, I think that's kind of common. I don't, again, I don't know if that signals to noise, but we end up like posting to our, to running the protocol. We've sort of, every 6 months here, whatever, we'll go find all the passwords that are Gotham TG passwords, like tell the users like, stop. I don't know where you're using these passwords, but stop using them.
Right.
Like, these are all compromised. I mean, is that like a standard best practice? I mean, at some level, I almost feel like, and I've seen people saying this now. Please stop using your corporate email to sign on to third-party websites. Like
100%, 100%.
Yeah, I mean that's really part of the structure. Yep. Do you think that's because again, when you're not generally not seeing it like Active Directory passwords on the dark web, or do you think you are? I mean, I don't think unless people are reusing them. I mean, is there like a best practice for this whole password management thing, or what do you tell people to do?
So personally, for me, speaking of password managers, I am all in on a password manager, and what's nice about it too is you can set these parameters that most of my passwords are over 20 characters. They include special characters, and it's unique to every single site. And what's great about these is not only do they have the desktop app that I have on my computer, I've got a mobile app as well on my phone, and it doesn't matter from what device I'm logging into. I can quickly open up that password manager, copy the password that I need for that specific site, and then paste it in and go. And yes, it's a few extra steps. And I know that not everyone out there will take those extra steps. It's literally like 4 or 5 extra clicks.
Right.
But it's not convenient. It's not saved in Chrome. It's not saved in Safari. But and yeah, I was a save in Chrome guy until I really saw how bad it can be when these password files get stolen.
Right.
In fact, I've gone through and I've completely wiped from all of my machines all of my saved password files on the browser, and I'm all in on a password manager.
Yeah, but you would say it's a best practice. I mean, if for customers to have dark web awareness, to kind of promote internal password awareness, share with customers when passwords have been turned over, these passwords have been turned over. That's
I think that's a great practice. A lot of people that are just your employees, they probably don't know these things. I've participated in a lot of cybersecurity awareness programs for companies, and October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So here in a couple of days, right? So these are things when I was at Risk IQ, we'd spend a lot of time, whether it was a client meeting that we just happened to be in town for, whatever, we would actually set up and do awareness training in for employees of companies. And I got to tell you, the amount of people that just had no idea about some of these things, they kind of had it in the back of their mind. Oh, the internet's scary, and I got to be really careful out there. But they didn't know what being careful meant. And so we would work on that with them. And it goes down to that, right? Like, I think it's great that you're letting your employees know, hey, this is what's being leaked out there, because that's probably the first time they've ever heard something like that. And we need to continue.
Yeah, when a person
Yeah.
sees a list of passwords that they've used in the past, like stop using these passwords, and they're all real passwords. It is like an eye opener for them.
Their stomach sinks. They're like, oh, wow, yeah.
These are all gone. Yeah, but so do you also see? I know, because again, I know this is a question I get from people too. Like, do you see people doing searches specifically for executive reputation? Like, is it like, do you think that like, is that like looking for individual stuff? Is that something you see people doing a lot of, or
100.
Does that bear good fruit, or I mean, or is interesting?
100%. I mean, these criminal organizations are after money, right?
Right.
Companies have money, but so do individuals, the VIPs, the C levels, the board of directors. Depending upon your organization, 100%, you also should be looking into and making sure that people aren't targeting those individuals that are high net worth individuals, because that is also on their radar. Again, they're following the money, and not only do the companies have money, but there are certain individuals out there that have money. And one could argue sometimes their OPSEC is worse than the companies, and they're easier to get into. So absolutely, executive protection has to be on the list.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, but it's a little bit all bad news. Like, once if there's stuff out there, it's awareness, but at that point you can't get that horse back in the barn.
Right.
So whatever it is that's out there, but you're just, but certainly to know and be aware of it is something, I guess.
Yep.
I guess just switching gears like a little bit, I think one of the other things, that I know you guys or everyone does in the dark web to some extent is try to stay ahead of the hackers, right? Like the toolkits, the who are the bad actors, what is all that stuff. I know that's part of what the industry does. Do you think customers should be doing that, and how and why should they be doing that, or worrying about that element of the game?
Yeah, I mean, definitely knowing the techniques and building, defenses around it is certainly helpful. Not every company is going to be equipped to do that. And so but the awareness, at least, again, I think one of the biggest things that still today is an eye opener for me is the fact that we're talking to customers about initial access broker market, and it's eye opening to them, right? That passwords and things are easily sold, not only easily sold, cheaply sold. $10 right. Typically is the average going price. And so, the continual awareness, continual learning, what are the things in the TTPs being used, at least the awareness of of what they're doing is a big first step. Obviously, you're not going to defend against everything, but if the various tactics that are being used, that's a good first step.
Well, it's also, I mean, again, I think like in terms of the breakpoint of who has it, right? If you have a red team, I would assume the red team would want to have awareness of what tools are being actively used. If your org does not have a red team, maybe then that's something you're trusting your vendors to do for you. But certainly, if you have a red team, they should have some awareness of how the tools are evolving. Is that a fair statement?
Oh, 100%. And that even goes well into, patch management and going after CVEs, right? One of the things in our collection is exploit code POC exploit code, for example. So, CVE of the day drops, and, people are starting to understand, well, how does this impact me? We have a lot of customers with red teams that will then look for where's the exploit code being shared, and then they will go try to reverse engineer and see, are there ways that then, this can exploit our environment, and then let's prioritize remediation of that very quickly, as opposed to maybe something else that's recently dropped.
Yeah, well, and that's a thing that customers ask a lot, which is, I've got, everyone has, like, physics is a real thing. I have limited resources, limited time, limited stuff. How do I prioritize? And I guess what we're saying is, if you have awareness of what attacks are fresh and hot right now, you know which CVEs to go after, because everybody has more patching than they can possibly get to, I guess.
Exactly.
Right. So, but how do you prioritize that patching and tie that together? So that makes a lot of sense. So I guess maybe some other actions, like what, like, again, I really want to make sure, because one of the big questions I had, I guess, like, just the overall theme, because when I'm doing one of these, I kind of talk to people, and I'm out to dinner with a customer or whatever, just I kind of tag it onto my conversations. And one of the main things they were like is actionable ideas. Like what, like the dark web seems intellectually interesting, but actionable ideas. So I think we've had a couple. We've talked about, being ahead and know what the CVEs are, so knowing how to prioritize patching. We talked about specific, executive reputation. We talked a little bit about, password management. I guess what are we missing here? Like, I want to make sure that we get actions that customers can be taking based on what's on the dark web, some things they can do, things that they can do to fix to improve their stance, not just be like, oh, that's interesting. Did we miss any? Are we?
I'm trying to think. We've covered a lot of ground today.
We did cover a lot of ground, but I do want to make sure that we get to that, like that stuff, because I think that, and again, I think it depends so much on the size customer. Like I know, like, my biggest customers, they're like tracking individual bad actors, and they're using dark web data to build their knowledge base about specific bad actors, things like that. But to me, that's almost like nation state level. Like most people aren't doing that kind of stuff. But I mean, do you think that's real for a lot of more customers than I think it is? Or
okay. So I'm glad you brought that up, right? Because you've got the whole concept of people think threat actors are almost one-for-one APTs, right? You hear a lot about APT and, the various Iranian ones or Chinese ones, Russian, etc. But also too, it's not just the APTs that are out there. It is the lapses, right, that are out there as well. A gang of 18-year-olds, for example, who are just as recently as a couple of weeks ago, Uber is saying that it was, that they were attacked from lapses. Lapses was very noisy earlier in the year, and then we hadn't really heard much until apparently this Uber thing a couple of weeks ago. So it's, when you talk about threat actors, and it's not always APTs, which are going to be hard to track. But the other criminal organizations are, it's a little bit easier, right? Because they want to keep their reputation up. And so you could have, for example, Brad12 in one forum, and then Brad12 in another forum, and then maybe Brad12 in a different marketplace. And so how do we know that that's the particular Brad? And we do work with a lot of companies that are doing some level of threat actor attribution, right? It's hard to find out who that person actually is, who is behind the face behind Brad12. But if you know where Brad12 is spending a lot of their time, and that's something we've actually recently put a lot of development effort into, is these threat actor cards, as we call them inside our platform, where we will not only tie where are we seeing Brad12 in the particular areas, but what level of confidence do we have that our models are trained on to say that this Brad12 really is the Brad12 in all these other areas. And we'll look at various attributes like the language that it's written in, as well as perhaps like time of day. If we have some kind of IP attribution, is it the same geographical area? Obviously, IP spoofing, it's hard to say. So we don't rely heavily on that, but certainly, time of day, who they're interacting with, and we kind of start to build this social network graph. So then from there, you can also look at, okay, if you, for whatever reason, Brad 1.2 is on your radar, maybe because this particular threat actor is saying a lot about you in these other areas. Maybe they've sold some credentials from one of your employees in some marketplaces. Then you can start to see who are they interacting with the most, and then start to tie and maybe track those as well. That's when we get these really deep investigations that get going. And then again, you talk about, well, what's relevant, what's actionable. You start to build these alerts around these particular actors in general, because yeah, they may be targeting you. They may also be targeting others in your industry, your vertical, your sector. And those are things that you can share in your ISAC or in, with others in your peer group.
No, that's really worthwhile. And again, we've got to make we've got these tools, but they don't stop anything unless they have rules, right? So unless you have targets and thoughts and patterns, you can't program your tools properly. So it makes a lot of sense. I also think there's just the awareness, and awareness is too weak a word. This is the reality, right? This is what's out there. Like understanding the scope of the environment that we're in and what's happening, I think helps us make decisions. Like you told me this in one of our, we were talking last week about this, and you were talking about the credit cards and how the price of credit cards on the dark web has come down. It started me thinking about all the investments that the banks have made into fraud catching, all the things that they've done. And so when they looked at the problem wasn't necessarily when they could fix on the dark web per se, but they're like, okay, now that I understand the scope of this problem, a massive investment in fraud management on the credit card side is absolutely required, and they've done it, and they've gotten some benefit from it, because to just the information Brad shares, the price of credit cards on the dark web has come down. I don't know how, I mean, if you fill that in, but like I know it's come down over the last few years, and so credit cards just weren't worth as much, right? That's fair?
Oh,
Right.
absolutely. It's gotten to the point where in order to just get even a couple of dollars or $5, you have to be selling a batch of credit cards that's in the thousands, and where it's got full number and the CVS or the CVV and potentially the zip code as well, in order to get any type of money out of them. Because as soon as the for sale sign goes up, there's a very small window that somebody can use that credit card within the limits, within reason. They may be able to get a couple purchases out of it before then that credit card's flagged and they got to go to the next one. And so, yeah, I don't have the specific numbers, unfortunately, committed to memory, but we did release an article, I believe within the last month or two, talking about how just the credit card market in the underground is completely decimated. The bottom has fallen out. It's becoming a lot harder to get a hold of valid credit card information and then get it sold and then perform, the operations, the card issuers, the banks, they've gotten really good at their fraud protection.
Yeah, and I think similarly with the identity, again, these corporate policies say stop using your corporate email for other accounts, but also this move to passwordless, this move down, more and more effective MFA. Like as you see the problem and you live the problem and you keep looking at new passwords showing up in the dark web, you're like, okay, let's just come to grips with what this really is. And we've been saying the password don't work, but as you live that, you see all your passwords on the dark web. Like that reality has to, like I said, that you just have to suck that in as part of your environment. So I think it's just showing us that, right? I mean,
well, but even MFA also comes down to the user and user awareness, right? The Uber example, if you read into it a couple of weeks ago, one of the people's credentials, the contractor whose credentials were stolen and used, got a flood of MFAs, right? I think it was for almost 2 hours. And then and they weren't approving it. And then finally, the threat actor got so upset that they reached out to the person on WhatsApp and said, hey, I'm from the IT department. I need you to approve what just came through. And the guy was so fed up from hours of MFA flood, they just approved it. And then that's when supposedly Lapsus was able to get into Uber.
Yeah, no, I saw an article on this subject, and they basically, like, they're testing, and they're basically finding that if you send somebody 10 or 15 approvals in a row, finally out of frustration, they'll check yes just to stop getting the messages. Like, that's just the nature of users. So that's a little unfortunate, but something to be aware of. Don't just check yes, make it go away. That's not helpful. Sorry. Sorry. Yeah. Awesome. All right. So I had just kind of tagged for about this length. And we'll usually open for other questions, but is there anything like that we didn't talk about that you want to talk about? And if anybody else has any questions and they want to turn their mic up, we'll got to take questions as well.
I'll say from my side, I think, like I said earlier, we covered a lot of ground and in this time, and I'm glad we did. I think we covered some really relevant topics. Obviously, the deep and dark web is massive. There's a lot of various use cases. There's a lot of various things, but I think we had some good discussion here. I appreciate coming on.
No, I appreciate having you, Brad. I think it was awesome. And again, like I said, interesting topic for everybody. If you have any extra questions, we can always hunt Brad down and ask extra questions, or reach out to your Gotham reps. But I appreciate having you on, and thanks to Cybersixgill for promoting this. And hope everybody everyone down south, please stay safe, and everybody else, please have a great weekend. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.